Before we begin, I wanted to take a moment to revisit this conversation. This episode originally aired during a period of unstable remote connectivity while I was abroad, and because the topic resonated with so many people, I wanted to re-record it properly so the message could be experienced more clearly and intentionally. So tonight, we're revisiting a really important question. Is emotional safety enough to sustain a relationship, or is there something more people are longing for underneath it? Welcome to Sexpertease. I'm your host, Rivera. Emotional safety is something we hear about constantly when it comes to healthy relationships. It's often described as the foundation, the thing that allows people to open up, be vulnerable, and truly connect. And while that's absolutely true, there's a deeper conversation that doesn't get talked about enough. Safety alone is not what sustains a relationship over time. A lot of people assume that if a relationship feels calm, stable, and emotionally safe, that means it's working. But many people find themselves in relationships where they feel safe and still feel unfulfilled. That disconnect can be confusing, especially when everything seems good on paper. It raises the question, what's actually missing? In today's episode, we're going to unpack that. We'll talk about what emotional safety really is, why it matters, and where it falls short when it's not paired with other key elements. Because a healthy relationship isn't just about feeling safe, it's about feeling engaged, desired, and connected in a meaningful way. Now, emotional safety at its core, there we go. I was waiting for my screen, my slide to go to the next slide. So emotional safety at its core is about feeling secure enough to be yourself in a relationship, right? It means that you can express your thoughts, your emotions, and your needs without fear of being judged, dismissed, or attacked. So it creates an environment where vulnerability feels possible rather than risky. That's a powerful and necessary foundation. When emotional safety is present, communication tends to be more open and honest. People feel heard, validated, and respected in their experiences. It allows both partners to navigate challenges without immediately going into defensiveness or shutdown. That kind of stability can make a relationship feel grounded and supportive. But even though emotional safety is essential, it's only one piece of the puzzle. It creates the space for connection, but it doesn't automatically create the connection itself. And that distinction is where a lot of people start to feel the gap between what they have and what they actually want. There's a reason emotional safety has become such a major focus in conversations about relationships. As awareness around trauma, mental health, and emotional well-being has grown, people are more intentional about how they show up with each other. There's a desire to create relationships that feel healthier and more supportive than what people experienced in the past. A lot of individuals for a lot for a lot of individuals, emotional safety represents relief. It's the absence of chaos, tension, and emotional harm. It's what allows people to let their guard down and trust that they won't be hurt in the same ways that they may have been before. That shift is incredibly important and worth acknowledging. But in prioritizing safety, some people unintentionally start to equate safety with success. They assume that if a relationship is safe, then it should be enough. And that's where we start to see confusion, because safety creates the foundation, but it doesn't build the entire relationship on its own. So let's talk about a common misconception in relationships, which is that emotional safety equals a long-term success. People often believe that if there's no conflict, no tension, no emotional harm, then the relationship must be healthy, right? On the surface, perhaps that makes sense. But relationships are more complex than just the absence of problems. You can feel safe with someone and still feel disconnected. You can feel accepted and still feel unfulfilled. And that's where a lot of people get stuck, because they don't understand why something that feels good doesn't feel like enough. And that does create confusion. It creates confusion and sometimes even guilt for wanting more. Does this happen to resonate with you? This is where it's important to separate stability from satisfaction. A relationship can be stable without being deeply connected, and recognizing the difference is the first step in understanding what might be missing. Emotional safety creates stability, but fulfillment creates connection and desire. And we've talked about desire before. Safety allows you to relax, but fulfillment is what makes you engaged and alive within the relationship. These are two very different experiences, and both are necessary. A relationship that only has safety can start to feel predictable, or even stagnant over time. There's no tension, but there's also no excitement. There's comfort, but not necessarily passion or growth. And for many people, that's where dissatisfaction begins to show up. Healthy relationships require both stability and stimulation. You need to feel secure, but you need to feel chosen, desired, and emotionally engaged. Without that kind of balance, something will always feel like it's missing. This is often where relationships begin to struggle quietly. There may not be obvious problems or major conflicts, but there's a sense that something just isn't evolving. Conversations feel repetitive, emotional connection feels surface level, and growth starts to slow down. When there's no challenge, no tension, no push for deeper connection, relationships can plateau. And while that might feel peaceful at first, it can eventually lead to emotional disconnection. People stop feeling seen in new ways, and the relationship loses momentum. This kind of struggle, it's subtle, which is why it's often overlooked. But over time, that lack of depth can create distance between partners, even if everything seems fine on the outside. Relationships don't sustain themselves just because they feel safe. They require effort. And we've talked about effort, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about effort next week as well. But effort shows up in how you communicate, in how you listen, and how you continue to invest in each other over time. It's an active process, not a passive one. Consistency matters more than comfort. Definitely. Consistency matters more than comfort. It's not enough to simply exist. You're not just going to exist peacefully together. That's not enough. You have to keep showing up for each other intentionally. That includes emotional presence, it includes curiosity, and honestly, a willingness to grow together. When the effort is mutual, relationships tend to feel balanced and energizing. But when effort starts to drop, even in safe environments, connection begins to weaken. And that's where the imbalance starts to form. So, we're going to talk about safety a little bit more. When emotional safety exists without the effort, one partner often ends up carrying more of the emotional weight. I bet you know exactly what I'm referring to. Some of you are watching this and you're like, yeah, that's me. That's heavy. They're the ones initiating conversations, checking in, trying to maintain connection. Meanwhile, the other partner may become passive or complacent. Does that sound familiar? I'm sure it does. And unfortunately, this is more common than you think. And this imbalance doesn't always show up as conflict. That's the confusing part. It often shows up as quiet resentment. One person feels like they're doing more while the other assumes everything is fine because there's no tension. And that disconnect can continue to grow over time. A relationship needs both safety and participation. Without mutual effort, safety can turn into a space where one person gives and the other simply receives. And that dynamic just isn't, it's just not sustainable long term. Desire. So desire is something that we've also spoken about. I've done 4-week-long series on desire, but desire itself doesn't come from safety alone. It comes from energy, from engagement, emotional presence. Feeling desired and connected requires both people to actively invest in the relationship. It's not something that happens automatically. When relationships become too comfortable without intention, desire can start to fade. There's no friction, there's no anticipation, there's no emotional buildup. And without that energy, connection can start to feel flat. Desire isn't just physical. That's a common misconception in itself. And I talked about this before. Desire isn't just a physical thing. It's emotional too. It's about feeling wanted, valued, and seen in a dynamic way. And that requires more than just a safe environment. It requires ongoing effort, ongoing attention. So sometimes emotional safety can lead to avoidance. And I did do a whole series on attachment styles. And so we have avoidant styles, anxious styles, things of that nature. But in this case, this type of avoidance that I'm referring to is when people don't want to disrupt the peace. So you may find yourself in a relationship like this where it's stagnant. People don't want to disrupt the peace, so they avoid difficult conversations or deeper issues altogether. So on the surface, it can look like harmony, but underneath, it creates disconnection. Avoiding conflict doesn't strengthen a relationship. It weakens it over time. Listen to that again, because some of you guys are probably in very peaceful relationships, not realizing this. Avoiding conflict doesn't strengthen a relationship. It weakens it over time. So important conversations get delayed. Needs, they end up going unspoken. And tension builds quietly, hence the quiet resentment. Eventually, that avoidance can lead to bigger issues down the line. Healthy relationships require the ability to navigate discomfort, not just avoid it. True emotional safety includes the ability to have hard conversations and still feel secure afterward. Now, emotional safety does not mean that there's an absence of boundaries. In fact, boundaries are what protect emotional safety in the long term. They create structure, they create clarity. Boundaries create mutual respect within the relationship. And accountability. Accountability is very essential. Each person has to take responsibility for how they show up, how they communicate, and how they contribute to the dynamic. Without accountability, relationships can become unbalanced. When boundaries and accountability are present, safety becomes more than just comfort. It becomes a framework for growth. And that's what allows relationships to evolve in a healthy way. So, what about complacency? Stagnant, complacent relationships. There's a point where safety can turn into that, where it can just turn into complacency. When things feel stable, people may stop putting in the same level of effort. They assume the relationship will maintain itself. And over time, engagement starts to decline. Complacency doesn't happen all at once. It builds gradually. Small things get overlooked, emotional connection weakens, and intentional effort fades. Before long, the relationship feels stagnant instead of fulfilling. So, recognizing this shift early is very important because once complacency sets in, it takes conscious effort from both partners to rebuild connection and momentum. So, what actually sustains relationships? Well, a combination of multiple factors, right? Emotional safety is just one piece, as we have figured out. But it has to be paired with effort, communication, accountability, and desire. These elements work together to create a balanced dynamic. You cannot have a relationship with just one of those pieces. Relationships need both stability and movement. They need a foundation, but they also need growth and evolution. Without that combination, something will always feel incomplete. When all of these elements are present, relationships tend to feel both secure and fulfilling. That's where long-term connection is built, not just in comfort, but in intentional engagement. So here are some questions to ask yourself. If you're reflecting on your own relationship as I've been talking about this, there are a few questions that you can ask. Do you feel fulfilled or just comfortable? Is the effort mutual or does it feel one-sided? Are there conversations that you've been avoiding? These questions aren't meant to create doubt. I know this episode probably feels that way, but that's not what I'm trying to do. These questions are just meant to create clarity. Understanding where you are helps you decide what needs to shift. Awareness is always that first step towards change. Being honest with yourself about your needs and experiences is essential because you deserve a relationship that feels both safe and fulfilling, not just one or the other. You know? So, as we come to a close, I want to end with this. Emotional safety is incredibly important, but it's not the full picture. It creates a foundation for connection, but it doesn't sustain the relationship on its own. It never will. Okay, there's multiple pieces that require the effort, the intention, and the mutual investment. Healthy relationships are dynamic. They just are. They require both partners to show up, to communicate, and to continue choosing each other over time. Safety allows that to happen, but it doesn't replace the work. If this episode resonated with you and you want deeper conversations like this, you can support Sexpertease on Patreon. So here. Or you can book a one-on-one consultation with me. Yes, I do have one-on-one conversations with viewers and listeners like you. So feel free to visit Patreon. You can email me for a one-on-one consultation. And as always, stay curious, stay intentional, and stay safe.